36 inches in length.
Okay. All right. And were you able to get a requisition or anything so that we could get that money encumbered?
We are constructing those, so they are not ready built. So we will construct them. They'll be custom made. We just
Okay,
didn't have
so-
anything that was ready built, but we will take care of the funding for that, and so we'll take care of the financing on the
Okay,
backside.
right.
We think it's pretty nominal.
All right. Very good. Any
Yes.
questions for Mr. Holland from the council about the plexiglass? Okay. Thank you, Justin. All
You're
right,
welcome,
Lydia.
sir. Thank you.
Councilwoman Coonrod, we'll go back to your question now.
Thank you, Chair. On the agenda, I've requested several times, and our Jerry has reached out to Erskine as well to have the second reading of the Lucy boiler placed on the agenda,
Okay.
and it's not been placed on there yet.
Mr. Noblet,
Yes, sir.
it sounds like it's the desire of this council, if I'm my understanding, with Councilman Oglesby, and this is a planning and zoning item. Councilman Ledford, you got any questions or comments as far as putting this on the agenda?
No, if it's needed to be on there, we need to get it on there.
And
When
Mr. Noblet,
do you want it on there, sir?
you good with next week?
I think the
Councilwoman
request
Coonrod?
has been made. We need to get it on there as soon as we are legally allowed.
Well, we can do
There
it
has to
next
be at
week.
least 7 days notice. I'm just trying to make sure, and I want to make sure, at least on y'all's end of it, that's what the council wants.
Okay. Where's Nicole? Nicole?
That might move it to the 14th.
That's what I'm thinking. There's no way, it has to be noticed in the paper. Mr. Noblet,
I guess the zoning ordinance has already been previously noticed, but it's been off the agenda for several months now. To put it back on, we at least need to notice it in the paper. Yes, sir.
so Mr. Attorney, in your legal opinion, would we be safe in saying it would be better to put it on the 14th?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Councilwoman Coonrod, you good with the 14th?
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Phil, would you make sure that gets on the 14th of July, please?
Yes, sir. And we'll get out notice.
Okay, very good. Any items on the 3-week look ahead that we need to discuss? I will tell you this, and Councilwoman Coonrod, we had a discussion earlier. If you'll notice, under Youth and Family Development, there's a contract to renew the Lexia reading program for $28,000. My concern was that we were in lockstep with the school system, particularly with the situation that we find ourselves in with online learning. I would like to have a Youth and Family Development Committee meeting. If you would get with Jason, he's, I think, going to try to work out some scheduling with the school system so that they could be present as well. But if you would look at that, I would appreciate it.
Sure, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Any other, Councilwoman Coonrod, do you have a question about the 3-week look ahead?
Yeah, I was just gonna bring that up about the Lexia, but you
Okay,
much. Just wanted to see how we could partner with the school system with,
Yeah.
you know, our kids being out and how it can be more accessible for students to use. You touched.
okay, all right. Anything else that needs to come? Councilman Ledford, I see your hand.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I had a question about the change in the riverfront contract. It looks like the rent is going to be altered based on a percentage of gross sales. I was just wondering if someone could give me a background on that and
All right, Richard Beelan. Miss Lydia.
Yes, sir. He is joining us as we speak.
Okay. Mr. Beelan. You'll unmute.
Hi, council. Yes, sir. That The agreement with the Irwin Marine was supposed to have started on May the 1st. And because of everything that's happening right now, we were unable to get that in place. So if you'll remember, recently we passed a 3-month extension for that. This just brings the rent in accordance with that agreement that's going to be ongoing. So that they'll be paying what they'll be paying when the agreement starts.
Okay, so it's actually not an altercation of the payment structure, it's just a time frame?
Right, it is.
Okay, all right, well, that makes more sense to me. Okay, thank you, Chairman, I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
And,
Council.
and Councilman Mitchell, if you would, in the 3-week look ahead next week, would you cover the 2 items under CDOT or make sure that we have some explanation explaining those 2 items, please, sir?
You're asking me to cover those in committee next week?
In your Public Works and Transportation Committee next week, yes.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions, concerns, anything that needs to be brought before this council at this 3:30 agenda before we move on to our Public Safety Committee? Councilwoman Coonrod, new hand?
Yes, new hand. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Nicole sent out a copy of the resolution that I put forth. I sent it to Phil as well. Hopefully you all have had an opportunity to review it. But I would like for it to be placed on the agenda, and it's a resolution to, just to declare racism as a public health crisis in the city of Chattanooga. I don't know if it need to be put in legislation for us to discuss it. To me, it's really not much to discuss. We already know what the issues are. We know what the data and everything shows. But I really would like it to be put on the agenda. If I could get a second, or if it needs to be put in legislation, but I like to move forward with it.
I'd like to go in there with you, Councilwoman Coonrod, and I believe by our rules, it could be on as early as next week. I believe you can correct me, Mr. Attorney.
As long as we have 2 folks wanting to put it on the agenda for next week, yes, sir.
Okay, I'll be happy to do that with you, Councilwoman.
Thank you.
Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I was going to volunteer to co-sponsor, but I still think the council should have a discussion about it versus let's just go stamp this thing and move on.
Sure.
Well, is it your request that you'd like to see it in legislative committee?
Well, I honestly would like to move on about it because we've had this discussion. We already know what it is. We done talked over 4 years about these things, and it's what we've seen recently with the protests, with the killing of George Floyd, countless other things that's done happen. I don't see what is it for the council to discuss.
Well, go ahead, Councilman Mitchell.
Mr. Chair, if I could address it, I guess personally what I to about is what this does to help us make sure that this doesn't happen again. I'm fully aware of what the past is, even though I think that as a council, and we'll bring this up at probably a later time when we're talking about racial equity training, but I think any discussion the council can have in this direction. I'm not trying to hold the vote up though, and if it means that we have to go to a committee to have that discussion, then I'll just yield to the 2 council people and probably be right there with them next week.
Councilwoman Burrs, you've got a comment on this.
I do, sir. I think that we probably get more strength when we do have a discussion. No argument about the topic at all, but I think we pretty much have tried to follow our procedure. If the resolution, just like with the equity resolution and the other resolutions, would go to Councilman Smith first, because we're having strategic planning next week, I think we could give it a really thorough discussion and even bring more emphasis to it. So I guess I'm with Councilman Mitchell about, I think it's so important that I think it be treated like the other resolutions for equity, anti-racist, all of those things.
So I think,
Mr. Chair, can I offer a solution or a possible solution?
Vice Chair, yes. Go
Thank you,
ahead.
sir. We are having a legislative committee meeting today here in just a few minutes, as a matter of fact, where we're discussing the voting resolution, quality resolution. If people have had an opportunity to review this resolution that Councilwoman Coonrod has put out, I'm happy to discuss it today so that she and Councilman Oglesby can have it on the agenda when they are choosing to next week. If it pleases everybody, I'm happy to do that. Or we could cover it next week in agenda session. I just want to make sure that we're being respectful to multiple council people that are wanting something put on. And unless there is a significant situation where it needs to be discussed, and if there is, I'm happy to do that today.
Councilwoman
Mr.
Burrs,
Chair,
so-
Mr. Chair, if he would just, could we have it up? I haven't seen it. So if we could have it up, I don't really care.
Councilwoman, can I email it to you, or you want to share? You'd want to talk about sharing the screen?
Let's share it because we usually discuss language. So let's
Okay.
share it.
Mr.
I'm
Chair, when during committee, I'm happy to pull each of these up and do a share screen on them when we discuss them, if that's okay with you, sir.
Okay, let's do that. I would like to see them brought and discussed at committee. That's
Okay.
in keeping with our rules. That's the reason we have rules, so that we can follow them unless there's some kind of dire emergency that we don't follow them. But let's do that. I think that'd be a great idea.
Okay, I'll handle it today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else then that needs to come before the council? Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Phil, we've been, I guess, playing email tag. I know that you're busy,
Yes,
but I
ma'am,
wanted
I've been
to-
in court today. Yes, ma'am.
And our chief of police has done great with implementing and kind of, tailoring the 8 can't wait to the city of Chattanooga. But I did request that we put that in a resolution form or ordinance as well, so we can make sure that we're letting our constituents know that we hear them and we did do something about it. But I haven't received that resolution from your office yet.
Yes, ma'am. And I sent you an email today, this afternoon, explaining that I did not think that you needed a resolution since the police department had adopted that as part of its rules. And the police chief under our current rules right now is the one that adopts regulations for the police department. And he has actually done that in compliance with your request. Many of these items that are included on that list are already in the standards and requirements here for the police department. So that's the reason I did not prepare a resolution for the council, because I thought it would be duplicative of those rules that are already in effect.
Right. Well, that's why we want it. I needed to, our constituents need to know that we heard them and we move forward with it along with our police department. That's what the legislation is about. Is
Yes, ma'am, it's not legislation, it would be a resolution.
But a resolution.
Okay.
Yes. But we still need to act on it, and I'd appreciate it if you can send that to us.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a couple things, just briefly. I sent out some information about an individual that does some training that I think could be called racial equity training. And I would like to have a conversation about not necessarily that person, but specifically, and I don't want to do it today because I know we've got 2 committee meetings, but maybe next week in strategic planning, I'd just like to ask the question of the council: what do we want to get out of that training? What, from the viewpoint of, as a council, what do we want to try to achieve in that training, I guess would be the way to say that. And I'm perfectly willing to wait till next week to speak about that in strategic planning. If somehow you can work your magic, Mr. Chair, and get it on the agenda. The other thing I'd like to bring up is I think we've had some requests from constituents to do something about letting the hearing impaired participate better in our council meetings. And I actually asked an organization, they don't do that. So I would just like to see the council move in the direction of arranging for some work with hearing impaired as we are meeting in public.
Sure.
Thank you.
Both of those things are excellent ideas, Councilman. And we do need to, Madam Clerk, Nicole, are you with us? Well, Karen or
Mr.
Miss
Chair,
Lydia,
I
Go
can
ahead.
probably answer to part of that, sir.
As to whether she's with us, all I was
Yeah.
going to say, all I was going to tell Karen or Miss Lydia, if we could get the racial equity training on our strategic planning for next week, as well as a discussion on providing for hearing impaired. Oh, there she is.
Yes. Hello.
Nicole, did you hear what I was just saying about getting items on the strategic
Yes.
next week? Okay. And we can talk a little bit offline further about that. Okay. Thank you. All right. If there's nothing else, and I see no other hands, we'll move into our Public Safety Committee, chaired by Councilman Anthony Byrd. Councilman Byrd?
Frozen?
Somebody wake him up.
Is he asleep or?
Might be frozen.
I should. Where'd he go? He's offline now.
He's coming back.
Okay. Is he?
He's gone.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay. Let me ask you, Vice Chair Smith, are you
Sure.
ready? Are you ready for your committee?
Anytime.
Let's go ahead and go to Legislative Committee. Oh, wait a
Oh, there he
minute.
is.
Wait a minute.
Thank you.
Councilman Byrd,
Had a little glitch, sir. I apologize.
are you ready to proceed with the Public Safety Committee, sir?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. All right. I'm turning the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Chair. Welcome to June 30th, 2020 Public Safety Committee meeting. May I have approval of the minutes?
Move to approve.
Thank you so much. Right now, we have on the floor proposed changes for the Police Advisory Review Committee ordinance. And Phil, would you have that in front of you right now?
I sure did, sir.
All right, sir. Thank you so much. Are there any questions? And would you like to read over some of the changes first before we go to any questions? I'm pretty sure everyone received it. And if you can, tell us some of the changes that were put in, and then we'll take any questions from the body.
Well, at the council's request, as usual on these matters, I have provided a red line version of any changes that were requested. Those changes have been included in red for the version that you had, in addition to a black line version with those changes included. As you can see on the first page of the document, the only change was change of regarding the sections 1659 through 1666. Regarding the second page of the document, there was a starting date for initial appointments to the committee no later than August 1st, 2020, since all of those individuals have had some training at this point in time that would allow them to actually vote on the committees. I believe that's one of the requirements within these rules. In order to be able to make a decision on police officers and their discipline, there needs to be some training for the board members to make that decision. The initial appointments are all supposed to begin on August the 1st, 2020, and they were stated to be filled for 4-year terms in here. I think initially there was a 3-year term, so that's one change on page 3. On page 4 of 12 in item E under 1661E, that was the one that there had been the most changes requested on. And it's regarding the amount of training that would be given to members of that committee. And each member who is appointed to the committee shall have completed Citizens Police Academy course offered by the police department and such other training as it may be deemed appropriate by the police chief as soon as possible after appointment before they can become a voting member. The language now was requested by, I believe, Councilman Gilbert on here to say that the council office will maintain a list, that may have been Councilman Henderson, of all persons who have completed the Citizens Police Academy within the past 2 years. And then there's a reference that the council may choose appointments to the committee from any person who has completed the Citizens Police Academy within 2 years of the date of appointment. And the other language in that section was recommended by the group to be deleted in that section. If there's any questions about why the Citizens Police Academy is necessary, I think the police chief can provide information to you regarding that. And if you want to have some list of people who are others beyond the ones that have completed the Citizens Police Academy, those individuals would not be able to be a voting member under these rules until they have actually completed it. The other changes that are referenced here are powers and duties of the chair. Those are over on page 5 of the document. And there was at least a request in there to delete the unsworn or anonymous complaints situation. But if there's any complaint that is received by the police department, it would be turned over to the Internal Affairs Division of the department. That's what's referenced in the document. There's no requirement for it to be sworn at that point. There was also on page 6 of the document, there was a recommendation for the delete of the reference to unsworn or anonymous complaints that the chair is able to resolve without any investigation by IA. They wanted to make sure that all complaints would be forwarded to Internal Affairs if there was any complaint, and it did not allow things to be resolved just simply by the chair. Last, go over again here, over on page 8 of 12, there is a blue highlighted section that was deleted that referenced the committee may notify complaints when a case they have filed will be heard by the Police Advisory and Review Committee and allow them to provide testimony. It is saying that the committee members would required to be having the training. It was just not a proper area to have that in there. The committee area for review is later on, and their review is after the I guess the internal affairs findings have been completed and sent to the police chief and to the to the committee for review. Your references on changes are on page 9 of that document as well in red, which were requested by the committee members. And it included a provision here to say that any action after review by the committee and a majority vote of the members, they would request the police chief to conduct further investigation of the incident if needed, and they determine the investigation is not complete. So the committee has an ability to be able to look at the extent of the investigation that IA has done, and that has to be responded to by the police chief within 30 days after that occurs. So there's a time frame referenced in the document. And then after review of the police chief's response, the committee by majority vote will recommend a final disposition in accordance with the powers that they have under section 1666 of this document. And if it's upon receiving that recommendation from the committee, the police chief then makes a final decision on officer decisions, disciplines on here, because it is what that employee is employed by the police chief and not by the committee or by the council. Lastly, over on page 10, the committee had requested the form language to be at least taken out because they were going to include all of the reference for allegations as required in the document, but they thought they would like to have at least some ability to be able to develop their form. And I believe those are the only changes that have been requested at this point in time here, and we've tried to document everything that we got.
All right, thank you so much, sir. I see I have a couple of hands up. Councilman Gilbert, is that a new hand, sir?
Yes, new hand. It's new hand,
right,
sir.
You have the floor.
Chair, if I have too many questions, I will ask for you to come back to me if somebody else wants to speak.
Yes, sir.
These questions, some of them just to fill. For one, August the 1st that you made the change of the day that we advisory board started, will that be the official date so that this coming August the 1st will be 1 year?
I think that the initial appointments would be beginning August 1st, and so they'd have a 1-year appointment from August the 1st.
So August 1st, it will be that. Okay. I appreciate
And
that.
at this point, everybody's gotten their training, I think, so that's the reason to give them a full year after they've received their training.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
The other question is, can it be placed in there where, like I spoke earlier to you, that the council have a choice of choosing whoever they want to choose, as long as they complete the class of the police academy?
You can do so. The only problem that does for your committee is that they wouldn't be able to vote until they've completed their training. So it might
Right.
slow down their ability or slow down the quorum ability of that body. So that's the only problem. But yes, you can add a requirement that anyone can be picked. The state law does not allow you to exclude people because of their profession from this body, but you could pick a member provided that they at least obtain that training within a certain period of time.
Yeah, I mean, just add that part to it, because, you know, if they got a list already available, they can choose that list too. But if they want an option of choosing somebody they want in there, they can do that if they finish the course. They can't start till they finish the course. Or they can't vote until they finish the course.
Yes, sir. And we can make amendments to that if you'd like to have that, and if that's what the body wants to do in that section.
Okay. The other thing was, I noticed that the chair would be the one receiving any complaints. Could it not be where any member can receive a complaint and give it to the chair, and then the chair will sign off on it that they gave it to them, and then the chair will give it to IA, and IA will sign off that they received it, so they will show that person that gave it to them that that process has been done. And I think the reason I'm saying that is because people feel more comfortable sometimes with people that actually know versus people that don't, that they give information to. So that's why I'm suggesting that.
Yes, sir. And I guess the question is where to add that in the documents here. If you wanted to add that to section 1661F on here, we could add that as another requirement on here, that any, I guess, complaint that is provided to a member of the committee shall be forwarded to the chair.
Right. And I think,
which section did you say, Phil?
1661F, we've got items 1 through 5 right here. You could just make that an additional duty of a member of the committee to forward any complaints that they receive to the chair.
and the other one was, once they forward this to IA, can IA in 30 days or maybe 60 days give some type of report they haven't gotten to it yet, or they're working on it, to the board, so that at least they know that the process is still going? Because I do know they get a lot of cases, but at least that board would know where they stand with the case they provided to the police or to IA.
Yes, sir. There can be a report back as often as the committee requests that. I mean, they're going to have to deal with the manpower issues that are available there in internal affairs. But yes, they can make that request and see where they are on cases.
Should we put that inside this, or should we not put this inside the ordinance?
Well, I think the chief is going to be doing that, and they're going to be responding. But if you want to have that as part of the ordinance, we can add it.
I would like to.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Byrd, I think that was all of it. I'm gonna check and make sure, but I think that was all I had to ask.
Great questions, Councilman Gilbert. I'm gonna go to Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Russell touched on a couple of my questions, but Phil, just want to know with you if we could create some kind of resolution to send to the state so we can have actual teeth in this the oversight board, because right now it's really not a lot of teeth in it to produce the results that we're actually looking for to happen. I think it's great that we've created it. I think it's awesome that it's going to be on the ballot for citizens to vote for. But I feel like we need that extra added to it to give us some teeth. Or can you create us something to send to the state?
Well, I don't know what type of teeth you're asking for in that regard. First off, I can at least provide provisions, at least you're adopting this as part of your ordinance by the city. That would be something that would be known to anyone that is working for the city, that this is how there would be a review. The only aspect of state law that I'm aware of that there is an issue here, and I tried to make sure I made a copy of the state law provisions that I forwarded y'all, I believe back on June the 8th at that point in time, which is the current bill that has been adopted as state law, which was House Bill 658. And let me see what's the date of the law. It's Public Chapter 320 here. And what that statute does is it limits the authority of a community oversight board to matters that are reported to the board and the issuance of revisory reports and recommendations to appointed officials here. And they say that the Community Oversight Board does not have the power to issue subpoenas. That's one thing that is out there in the rule. It does say that a subpoena issued by a local legislative body, which this body does have the power to issue subpoenas if necessary, on behalf of the Community Oversight Board, has to be issued pursuant to a majority vote of the legislative body, which I think it would have to be anyway. You have only the authority to act by a majority of your members, not by individuals. It's not to be issued in the form of a blanket authorization, but has to specify each document to be produced or a witness to testify, and it can't be issued for documents that are confidential under state law. So if there's a pending criminal investigation ongoing by the district attorney's office there, normally that's not the type of thing that you would be able to issue a subpoena for. So those are some issues in the state law. And it also requires that this board issue a support report to the chairs of the State Judiciary Committee at least once a year here as to all the items that are presented to the board, the number and nature of reviews that is conducted by the board, and the number and nature of any reports and recommendations issued by the board. So if the board is just rubber stamping things or not doing things appropriately in that regard, the state would be reviewing that as well. So all that's involved in the statute here. And I guess the issue on my end of it, if we want to go broader than that, I need to know what part of that state law you want to be.
For me, it's for to have subpoena power. I think they should be able to, have subpoena power as well, or it needs to be highlighted. And but I think it's in our oversight board policies that the council has subpoena power. Maybe we need to bold it so they can see that we have subpoena power. I did hear you reference about what our district attorney is going to do. We've seen repeatedly that what he won't do, and that's press charges. So that's a whole nother thing. So maybe we need to communicate more that we, the city council, do have subpoena power, and we can subpoena certain things. Because I don't know if our citizens are clearly aware of what we can do and what does that mean with what we can do. But also I want to know, with the request that the DSA members had sent us, any of this stuff can we put into the ordinance? I know it's a lot that we can't do as far as because the state will preempt it or whatever. Our chief of police, I gotta say, has been great with sending information, to Tennessee Post to make sure that their certifications are taken and things like that. But can we put that part into the ordinance as well? Because we know he can do it, but as long as it's in there, it could be a recommendation.
I believe the chief has been doing that, and I guess if the committee wants to make a recommendation that someone's post commission should be is revoked in that regard, then they should do so. Normally the chief actually has to attend those meetings and actually make that request by one of his representatives. And I know that he has done that in cases where there have been policy violations that have been proven after there has been due process hearings that have occurred. That's one of the reasons that we're talking about the due process aspect of this, because both the charter and state law require that type of protection to be provided to police officers and firemen under your charter.
Okay, so a lot of this stuff that that citizens want to have done, it really requires a charter change, which means it needs to be placed on the ballot. So that's a whole nother discussion. So
Yes.
we discussing this oversight policy, and they're asking us to do the unthinkable, the unimaginable, even though we want to think outside of the box. But we have to be realistic of what exactly that we can do. And that's where you come in, that like, what can we do? What can't we do? Because our hands are tied and we're getting our behinds chewed out by our citizens who's demanding more and more. And it's only so much that we can do as far as legislation wise.
Yes, ma'am. And the state, that is one example of that under the state law, where they have preempted the ability to try to allow a local, I guess, committee, an oversight committee, to have the subpoena power. But you do have the power as a council to do that under your charter.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilwoman Coonrod. Great questions. Chairman Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was some concern that all of the committee members on the Police Advisory Review Committee was not aware of the changes that we were making. Can you confirm that all members were emailed a copy of the changes that we're proposing?
I believe Maria and Nicole have actually done that as well.
Okay. And can you also confirm that they were made aware of this committee meeting today to go over this?
And Karen is nodding her head. I see her.
An affirmation. I just want to make sure that we have that on the record.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, if at some point I've got an item that is related to the Police Advisory Review Committee, but it is not about the changes per se. So once we get through with discussing all the changes, if you would come back to me so that I can bring up the
Yes,
matter.
sir, I will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilman Gilbert, is that an old hand or a new one?
New hand, sir. New hand.
New
Always
hand.
new.
All right. Go ahead, Councilman Gilbert.
Chair, in the future, I would like to have a meeting discussing some of the policies that I think if people know where they stand, if it's a policeman, whoever it may be, and they know what the rule is. If you cross that line, then I think that'd be a better opportunity for all of us, because if we say no chokehold, then what's the penalty behind no chokehold?
Right.
What's going to happen? And the citizens need to know that also, so that an officer would know where they stand. If they do this, it could be, in my opinion, termination, or take them out of the police force at all in general, and hopefully criminal action behind that. But I just want to have this conversation on talking about policies and what can we do to put some concrete, no gray area, because it is what it is.
Right.
And then behind it, because I think a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses do have that. They do have written, verbal, written, but they also have automatic termination if you violate X.
Right.
So I want to talk about the violation of X. What is that?
Gotcha.
Appreciate
And
it.
okay, hold on a second. Councilman Jerry Mitchell.
And Mr. Chair, would you finish what you were about to say?
Oh, okay. Thank you, sir. That was one of the things too, Phil, that I had definitely had a issue with, even with Councilwoman Coonrod. Some of those things that I think need to be a little more concrete and a little more clear, Phil, that if these violations of the 8 can't wait are done, what are the repercussions? I don't know if we need to bring Chief Roddy up at this point or maybe at a later point to explain to us what are the repercussions if these 8 can't wait violations happen. Where do we go from there, and what would be the repercussions? And they also answered several questions. I would like to also see in here that we can, if the body of the oversight board lets this body know that we need to bring an officer to the carpet, I think that subpoena power, it needs to be put out there that if the body asks us to do it, that we will vote on it. But we could bring that officer to the carpet. I just think that it does need to show that this oversight board is not just really babysitters, or just because even sometimes me as a councilman, I feel, sometimes my words or my authority is not taken seriously enough, because I can't fire anybody. All I can do is make suggestions. Darren tells me all the time, zoning and the budget are my two biggest things that I have, but if it comes to me firing somebody, I can't do it. So sometimes I feel my authority is not there in some instances, although I would like to reprimand or say some things are being done wrong. So I would like to see that in this body of work, that we will subpoena, or that we will be voting to subpoena someone if the oversight board does ask us to do that. So I definitely know this is going to be a living document that we're going to have to continue to go over.
Yes, sir.
So that was my point I was going to make, but we're going to continue. Mr. Mitchell, Councilman Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just four comments. One, with the way we started this, Mr. Attorney, and now the new 2020 date, and I understand why you went in that direction, but I'm afraid it causes potentially a little bit of confusion. When do we have anything in there that says specifically this body will begin its work on this day, versus you have to have the things that were said? And maybe I missed it, but I feel need for that clarification, because there's situations that can come up today, and with the August date, does that mean that this committee cannot review anything before that date? I have a question about that. Second question I have is, this law feels a little bit nebulous to me as relates to how much authority does this committee have in helping set policy. I think that it's not subpoena power, and I realize the states tried to preempt that, but I haven't seen anything in state law that preempts, let's call this committee civilians, for lack of a better term. It don't have to be civilians, because the state's preempting us, from stopping people that are sworn being on the board. But what can we get something in there that is a little bit less nebulous or more concrete about the chief needing to, whoever the chief is? I understand we've got a great chief right now. Are we going to be lucky after that? So because of that, is there anything in there that would require the chief to live a little bit more with this committee? Another example is, I think the committee is required to meet with the chief once a year. That's kind of like what's going on the rest of the time. So I would like to know that. Another thing I would like to know, and I think it says the same thing about the council, is the committee would come to the council at least once a year. That doesn't seem to me to be a relationship. Of course, we could be more proactive and more aggressive and try to get more involved with the committee's work. But it seems to me that that's a little bit lax, and we have to talk one time a year. So there's those. And of course, I've got to bring up what we're hearing most, or at least what I'm hearing most from constituents, at least on that side of the issue, is this board does not have, our committee does not have enough autonomy. Now, I understand the state has, you made a comment a little while ago about, they don't just, somebody doesn't want just a rubber stamp, but the way the state law is written almost makes this committee a rubber stamp. So, I've got to bring that up. I don't have suggestions for change at this point, and hopefully Council Person or Chairman Byrd is correct that it's a living document and we can move towards those things. But I don't see a lot of autonomy here. I don't see clarity in what the committee is going to do with policy. I need a little more clarity in when they actually are going to start doing their work. And I'd like to have some comment that's a little more than once a year as it relates to their relationship with the chief or the council. And those are just general comments that I have about this. I understand we're in a position where we're trying to get this on the ballot. And maybe some of these changes, I don't know, maybe they're too much right now, but I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Attorney, some suggestions about what we could do about those things. Not saying that anybody else on the council agrees with me.
Well, these provisions that we have in the code here have been in the city code now for about a year. The problem we've had is being able to get everybody trained in that regard in compliance with the ordinance that was adopted by the council. So the chair in any group can have a meeting whenever all the people can actually vote on issues. And that's been one of the items that they've been trying to get everybody completed through the training requirements so they could actually vote. So as soon as that is accomplished, I think they can hold meetings on there without a problem. The requirements of this ordinance here clearly are not just situations where there is no power of this group, because the powers and duties are set out in section 1663 of the ordinance and have been in that code for the whole time, which allow the chair to have complaints that they provide directly from members of the public regarding misconduct of police officers and then forward them to IA. That can be done and has been done here by Internal Affairs the entire time that this ordinance has been in effect. IA is undergoing investigation on officers always after complaints are made to the department in regard to that. So this body also has power to review what Internal Affairs is doing as an outside agency, not just a police officer in the department making that decision, but as an outside body to determine whether there's more information or not enough information included in the file. And they can request more investigation to be done by the investigators who are trained to do that in the Internal Affairs Department. They can also request, I guess, legal services from the city attorney's office, or if there's a conflict with our office, they can get an outside counsel to be involved in that. That's the power of the chair under this ordinance, and that they're supposed to be meeting on reviewing this with a body of members here to determine whether there are records and files that are being kept properly for them to do things. If they've got files that are confidential, they have the ability to maintain confidential records while there is an ongoing criminal investigation that is out there, and those records at some point in time may become public. That is allowed under state law that is in the law. The chair has to comply with any requirements under state law for providing information on the complaint process. If somebody does not have enough information about how to file a complaint, they can go to the chair, and I would argue that any member of the committee can help them be able to figure out how to file a complaint. We can look at things like that. That hadn't been requested so far, but if that's something that you think would be more open, that's an amendment to 1663 that could be there. And then after they get all that information, they are required to file an annual report. Doesn't mean they can only meet with you once a year. They at least give you a report, and a lot of your boards and commissions don't do that. You're going to be having at least an annual report of how many complaints are occurring, what the problems are being in association with that. And if there's a problem in the department on here, then that can be taken up with the mayor's office, who is the person that hires the police chief. So the committee itself is not just sitting there not doing anything. They get to review all of the records, and they also get to make recommendations for any enhanced training that may be needed to the police department, committee members, or council members for that matter, on which might include racial equity, gender bias, gender identity, and mental health challenges. And that's in the code currently on here at that point. But it does say they have to complete necessary training before voting on police discipline recommendations. And that's been one of the problems getting everybody through that to this point. They also have the ability and the authority to make recommendations to the police chief, which would improve police policies and activities to benefit the community. That's in the code right now. And those recommendations are things that the chief can listen to, but he has to adopt those because he is the person in charge of the department that all law enforcement people are subject to. So that's one of the requirements on here. And it also says they have to meet with the chief annually to discuss those recommendations on any policy reviews or policy changes. We have an outside agency called CALEA, and I think that's been in the news lately for the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department is undergoing a CALEA review right now. That is an outside agency that provides recommendations on policies of the department. And the department listens to those, and the police chief and his role as the chief of that department has to decide whether new changes are needed each year, because there are changes which occur in the law here in the Sixth Circuit or in the Supreme Court annually that have to be considered on what is and what is not considered proper use of force, proper use of the ability to arrest someone or not to arrest someone based upon offenses that are occurring. And then this report as well allows the committee to compile a report each year to determine whether the actions of IA are appropriate or not. And you get to tell that committee tells the police chief, the mayor, and the city council what's going on, and that's to be published once a year. So those are quite extensive abilities for this body to do when you're asking for a volunteer group to come up with those reports. A lot of this is going to have to be prepared by the internal affairs people in the department, which are already keeping a number of those records. But that has to be done annually here to be done. And the last most important thing, I believe, is the aspect of any time that there is an internal affairs investigation, it goes before the committee for review and recommendations. And if there are consistent actions by any police chief or police officer, for that matter, that go on that are not in a proper manner, that is all going to be public record. And the aspect of that going on and on and on here does not occur in Chattanooga.
Thank you so much, Attorney. How do you did that answer your questions, Mr. Mitchell?
Yeah, it answered my question. I never meant to intimate that this is a bad bill
Right.
or a bad law. What I'm trying to say is there's a difference between what ability to means versus
Thanks.
we want this group to interject themselves into policy making.
Thanks.
And at least that's what I want. And you know, again, I might be 8-1 there, no. But it's not. It's something that I'd like to make more clear and more specific that would occur.
And Councilman Mitchell, I'm sure that this body is going to feel a lot of your same sentiments, and we're going to make sure we do that and keep it moving as well. Thank you for your questions. Councilwoman Burrs. You're muted, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm listening to what Councilman Mitchell is saying and the discussion with Attorney Noblett. So I guess my first question is to Mr. Noblett. Phil, what access will we have? I know that there are meetings because there's personal stuff involved. What access will we have to what's going on with that group?
Well, the items that are reviewed by the body, if there is something that might be potential criminal action against an officer that is outstanding, would not be reviewed by you as open record until such time as there has been some action taken in that realm. As far as any of the records that are not involving criminal activity in that regard, that's a matter of state law on what is or is not confidential. You wouldn't be able to have access to employee information such as their bank accounts, their social security numbers, their information of their personal family addresses in that regard that are all protected under 107504.
Okay, no, that's not my question. My question is, if we had monthly reports from this group, sure, not identifying information, but these are the kinds of things, the topics they're coming up against, that doesn't break any rule, does it?
No, ma'am.
All right. So it would seem to me, because this is such an important committee, that we should at least get quarterly reports about how it's working, the types of things they're seeing, the types of things that need attention. Otherwise, it puts us in a position of speaking one-on-one to our appointees, and I'd much rather it be out in the daylight. So I'm wondering, is there anything that prohibits that?
No, ma'am, you can have more reports than that. It's just an issue of can all of these volunteer members provide those reports? That would have to be the committee itself providing.
And so it would be part of the committee chair's duties to provide quarterly reports to us, just like anyone else that we ask to provide reports.
Yes,
right?
ma'am. I got a feeling that's Miss Karen Campbell's obligation that would probably fall to in there.
Well, she wouldn't provide the report. Wouldn't the chair of the task force provide the report?
The documentation would be stuff that they would have as part of their minutes and their records of what they were dealing with, which would be part of that information that Ms. Campbell would be providing.
All right. So I'm suggesting to council, because it's something we've dealt with. Excuse me?
I'm sorry.
Can I go ahead? All right. I'm suggesting that we consider, and we've had this discussion about the beer board, we've had this discussion about the other boards. We appoint people to things, this being probably one of the most important things we've done, and yet we never hear back on a regular basis, so we know how it's going. So we created the legislation that created them. And yet we don't ever get reports back on how's it going? Where can we do things differently? How can we do things differently? And I'm suggesting, Mr. Chair, that perhaps, and I'm not sure whether that falls under legislative committee or whatever, that because we create the legislation that births these different committees, we should on a quarterly basis be hearing back from them to see what's happening, how they're doing. If we need to massage the legislation, we don't need to get into personal demographics. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about process and how's it working. And I think once a year probably isn't enough.
Yes,
out of sight, out of mind. And Mr. Chair, I would suggest, I would like to put that on one of our strategic planning agendas. I think it becomes very important that we know how these committees are doing. They kind of fade into the sunset, and I think we need to do more than that. So I guess I'm talking to you, Councilman Byrd, but I'm also talking to Councilman Henderson.
I'm making notes, Councilwoman.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me speak.
Hey, thank you, Councilwoman Burrs. That was awesome. I really appreciate those words. Needed that, and I do agree. Councilman Gilbert.
This is a question for Phil. This is just a thing outside the box question. Phil?
Yes, sir.
The Internal Affairs, is there a law saying that it have to be police internal affairs, or could someone that has a law, that knows about law, could be a part of it? Is there a law saying it has to be in a police internal affairs?
The Chattanooga Police Department has developed their standards for review of officer complaints. That is something that they have reviewed at the recommendation of the group called CALEA. And our standards that we have adopted do require at least police officers with a certain amount of investigation experience to be assigned to those roles. That one reason for that is they're trying to get an investigation that is done in the same manner each time, so that there's not someone that is brand new on the force that is suddenly doing something and they're leaving out steps in the investigation. That requirement is part of the orders that the police chief has adopted on that end of it here. But the police advisory committee, I don't know that they have the ability to be able to do an investigation, since they are a part-time appointed folks. That's one reason for that out there. Now, I'm not sure if there's any provision, and the chief would have to tell us if there's any provision that would allow for some type of outside investigator to be able to conduct internal affairs investigations.
Yeah, the question is not necessarily to the board. I'm not saying the board. I'm saying, is there a law? I guess hopefully yes or no. Is there a law prohibits an individual that's not sworn officer to be in internal affairs?
Well, I think there is a provision that requires someone to have adequate training to be able to determine what those policies are on the front end of it. And I don't know if someone who has not at least been trained in what the Chattanooga Police Department's policies are would be able to do that. But that's my concern. I will have to look on the law aspect.
Yeah, I'm really saying that because first thing I said was if a lawyer, retired lawyer, that has a lot of knowledge of law, probably a bit more than what they have, that can be a part of that is, can they, a citizen, a lawyer, a retired lawyer, whoever, can be on the internal affairs against the law to do that? That's the only question I'm asking.
I do not know. Currently, it could not be that way because they are supposed to be a police officer employed by the city.
But it can't, but I just want to know, can it be? Can you get back with me on that?
I will. Yes, sir. I'll have to look.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Phil, I guess, do we have anything listed that will be show from the police department what will be in violation of their policies? The reason why I'm asking, because I've seen 2 scenarios where a police officer was off duty and did some things, and they said it was against the police policies. He lost his job. So another officer who was at work, had the police car, he raped some women, but still he was able to have, an investigation that was 6 months, and then finally, he was let go after the 6 months. Like, do we have anything to show what's the difference with the 2 situations? Why one was in considered violation of the police policy and why one had to go through an investigation?
As far as I'm aware, there has to be an investigation before any officer can be demoted, suspended, or demoted in their rank, or suspended or terminated as an employee. That is required by your charter that was adopted in 1953. I think I sent y'all a copy of that section here. That was a private act of the state that was required for both fire and police firemen here in 1953. That has been in the city charter since that time and has not been amended. The requirements for officers to be investigated has to occur before they can lose pay. And so that's one of the issues. There has to be an investigation and an opportunity to do that. Sometimes officers resign before the investigation is completed. And I believe that's what Officer Logan did, as you were referring to just a minute ago here, before he would have been terminated by the police chief in an internal affairs, well, in a Loudermill, we call them hearing here, which gives an employee due process rights to have an opportunity to be heard. He chose not to be heard, and he resigned from the department and was convicted of the offense that he admitted to in federal court. That was a situation where the police department has requested that officer's ability to be a policeman anywhere would be done away with, not to mention the fact that he's going to be in jail for quite a bit of time.
Right. Well, I mean, today I'm not really here to just beat up on the police department. I'm really trying to see how the community, the council, and the police department can really work together to address the issues, which is the police brutality. But and with this oversight board, after the investigations and everything is complete and the recommendations are made by the people the citizens that we appoint, the ultimate decision goes to the mayor. I'm not to the mayor, but to our chief of police.
Chief. Yes, ma'am.
Who will ultimately say whatever sanctions or what he feel that is, that he feel necessary to reflect the actions of the police officer.
Yes, ma'am.
So I honestly feel like Chief Ryder has been doing a great job in, getting that kind of work done. And he's the first to admit, hey, there's more that we need to do and can do and probably should look at doing. But I feel like that it needs to be in addition to what he's doing. So it needs to be another set of eyes just to hold him accountable. Who's holding our chief of police accountable if the oversight board can't hold him accountable?
Well, I believe the mayor would be able to do that in regard because he is appointed by the mayor at the beginning of the term. The mayor would have an opportunity, if he's not doing something in an appropriate manner, to get another police chief.
All right.
I think that has actually happened here recently. I'm not sure which city that occurred in, but I believe that may have been just slightly south of us.
And so with the difference between what other cities are doing is that they have a paid person, like it's like a whole department that's handling the oversight committee. Is that something that we're trying to move to keep it separate from outside of the actual police department? Or are we wanting to just keep it how it is? I mean, Russell, he kind of acted on this before we really could all have good input in it before it was brought forth. And now we're having a back door to try to correct this thing. So, what's the plan moving forward? What's the intentions?
I thought the plan moving forward was to try to make sure that you're reviewing the actions of police officers to make sure they're acting appropriately in our community, that we've got a citizens review board that is overseeing what the actions have been done by internal affairs and by the courts up until this point in time. And that review committee will provide y'all with reports on whatever basis y'all wish to have them during the year, so to show that they're doing their job.
Well, I hope that's what's gonna happen.
If I may, Phil,
Yes.
I got some information here that says that it's still a response simulator that has to be done by the oversight board before they can start working. And I think that's something that needs to come into play. I see the date of August the 1st, 2020.
Yes.
I would like to know, when is that response simulator? When is this body going to be able to participate in that? Because to my understanding, we may need to bring Chief Roddy up, that this board can't start working until then. And I would hate to wait till October or close to August to get them started on that. I would like to start getting that done ASAP so this board can start working.
Yes.
I think we definitely need a date for that to see when that is going to happen. The other thing is, this document, I'm not sure, but I do understand that we have already put on the ballot to be voted for the charter amendment, right?
Yes, sir.
That's done.
Yes.
This right here is just to make sure that the ability of the board and the structure of the board is in place. And this document, like I mentioned earlier, will be a living document where we probably have to revisit time and time again. So I would definitely like to know, I think that this body is not ready to move on this document because you got some responses or some questions in. So I'd like to know, are you guys ready to move on this document moving forward? It's already done for the charter, but this document itself of the rules and ability of the oversight board, are you guys ready to move forward with that and put this into position? Or do you want to revisit this again in a week or two? Somebody.
Hands raised.
Jerry Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm ready to move forward, except that I would like to second council first recommendation that it's quarterly meeting report, however you want to word it, with them coming to the council. And I think it's very, very critical this first year that we stick to that, because I think we'll see what problems there are with how much policy they actually are involved in creating, how much autonomy, if you will, they have. I think that would be the main thing that I'd like to have an addition seen or change made to go to, instead of once annually, say quarterly.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm just, I guess if Councilperson Burrs put that into motion, I'd be a person to second it.
Okay.
I can do that.
Can I let me make a suggestion,
Okay,
Councilman
go.
Mitchell or Councilman Byrd.
Go ahead.
I've got it down for strategic planning, but in our goals and objectives for the council, that is something I think that we could add to that the chair of the Public Safety Committee would bring this board before us on a quarterly time for an update. I think that could be put in our council work of a plan of action or our goals.
Okay. How does this body feel about that? I definitely would be okay with making it happen.
May I respond?
Yes,
We
ma'am.
got hands up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. Russell Gilbert, Councilman Gilbert.
To answer your question, Chair, some of the changes that I suggest earlier, I would like to see them in there.
Yes, sir.
Be voted on. I think that this document was I think, pretty good document. As far as other documents we had in the past, like short-term vacation, it needs to be tweaked some. That's what we are tweaking it. So I do appreciate the opportunity to put some changes in there, and I look forward to hopefully voting on them.
Okay, thank you. If you can, Councilman Gilbert, send those changes to Phil so that we can get it in I'm assuming another red line version so that we can bring forth Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. I gotta agree with Councilman Mitchell. Like, it's really, because we don't went around over an hour about this. At the end of it all, we still at the end result that is not much that we can do as a council because our state specifically mandates certain things. So unless Phil is going to create resolutions to send to the state asking for certain things to be changed so we can have more power to legislate the work that our citizens really want us to do, then we just twirling our thumbs around and nothing is still going to get implemented. The point of the legislation is what it is, to create the oversight board, and they need to get started. We can always go back and make recommendations and amend this policy as many times if we want to change it. But if we don't ever get it done, like we was right there, Chip came back and said we want to change some stuff. Now again, it comes up again, somebody else want to come. We keep kicking the can down the road, and I think it's time for us to just go ahead and implement it, and we can change it at how fit that it needs to be.
Okay, so hold on, Jerry Mitchell, Councilwoman Burse.
Thank you. So I want to agree with Councilwoman Coonrod. I think that's right, but I think the way you do it is you go ahead and implement, and the one thing you absolutely have to have in there is the quarterly report. In other words, you implement it in August. We can't know what we don't know. There are a lot of things that we can do policy-wise that the state does not preempt. So what I would like very much is to go ahead and go forward with it. And I would like to amend it. And you know what? I'm going to put it in the form of a motion that we get quarterly reports so that we immediately can find out what is working, what isn't working, where there are issues. And we also have the power of the press. Unless we get these things out in the open in report form is fine, then we're never going to get going. So I would like to make a motion for sure, not a suggestion, that we amend it to say that there are at least quarterly reports from the day of start.
Do I have a second on that?
Yeah, I my hands up also.
Yeah.
Councilman Mitchell.
Yeah, I want to second that, and I want to just give my reason or another reason why I want to see that amendment is that this is an amendment as we are choosing people, especially the chair of this committee, that responsibility of a quarterly meeting needs to be in black and white right in front of them when they're considering if they want to try to do that job or not, because it is a volunteer job. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilman Gilbert, is that an old hand or a new hand?
New hand, sir.
Go ahead, sir.
This is for Phil. Phil, currently, can this board vote on anything? Because I thought that they all, at least a quorum, has finished the police academy, correct?
Yes, sir. They've finished the police academy. I'm not sure if they have completed at this point in time something called simulation training. It's simply something called shoot, don't shoot, as I would put it in layman's terms, where individuals are actually put in the same position as a police officer to make a determination of whether they would use deadly force based upon the training that they have received in the course. I think that is especially important in light of issues that we've had here recently in the news. I think it's important for a person who might be sitting on judging a police officer to be placed in the same position as that officer and making a determination on whether deadly force is appropriate or not based upon the policies that are adopted by the city.
Okay, so they haven't started that, correct?
As I understand it, that's just simply I guess a course that they can take, and it's not days-long courses at all here. It is simply they've already received the training. They just need to go and put it into practice.
Excuse me 1 second, please. If we can, Jason Irvin is here from the Chattanooga Police Department and would like to speak on that. If you can bring him up, please.
I can do that.
Jason?
I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Mr. Irvin, for joining us. You have the floor.
Yes, sir. Chief Roddy has this training. He coordinated with instructor Ron Zert from the training academy. He has the instructional block created and ready to go, but due to the pandemic, we've been trying to figure out how we'd like these part members to be actually in the simulator. It's going to be difficult to have this training go across the correct way over Zoom, over some kind of virtual setting. So that's been the issue of us actually implementing the training for these guys.
Thank you. Thank you. One of the things I know this body would like to see, and I've heard from several constituents, is to know when that would happen, because a lot of times, you know, people can perceive that as prolonging the situation. We do understand and respect the fact that COVID is here in our city and moving strong, but we would love to see a date sooner than later to where something is happening where maybe 4 of them go through it first and then another 4 go through another time, but to see that put into action as soon as possible.
Yes, sir. I'll get touch base with Chief Roddy. I've been texting with him, and we'll get you a date on that.
Thank you so much, sir. Hold on 1 second. Hold on 1 second. Councilman Gilbert.
I have another question. Phil?
Yes, sir.
Is there anything else that they have to go through in order for them to start anything?
Not that I'm aware of. Jason can confirm on that end of it here. He is able to tell you where they are in the level. One thing I was going to ask him, y'all had asked questions previously about what are the black and white bases for discipline in officers here. And there's a matrix that has been adopted by the police department that actually imposes specific punishment for certain actions. I wondered if you wanted to hear anything about that from Mr. Irvin, but the only thing that I'm aware of at all is the aspect of whether they can go through the simulation training here, and they're finished.
Well, Chair, can we hear from that young man to see if this is the only thing left?
Yes, we can. Mr. Irvin, is this the only thing left for this committee to do?
I don't know if you still hear me?
Yes, sir.
As far as I know, from what Chief Roddy said, that was the final step for the members to go through, was the simulation training. I'm pretty sure that was the last part.
Could you please ask Chief Roddy or get us 100% answer that this is it, and a date to where we're looking to start getting this committee through their training? Could you email us that or let the chair know of myself?
Yes, sir.
All right, I truly appreciate it. And I think that's all. Hold on a second.
Mr. Chair, there's a motion on the floor with a
Yes,
second.
that's why I wasn't going to go anywhere, Councilwoman Burrs. I was making sure I got all my hands answered. Phil Noblet, I see your hand up.
Yes, sir. Just on the aspect of if you wanted to hear anything about the discipline matrix that Mr. Irvin could tell you about. If you don't, on that end of it, we can go ahead with Ms. Burr's request. And I've already prepared language, at least in section 1664E, that would say the committee shall at least quarterly compile a comprehensive report on all activities which have been considered by the committee during the previous quarter. And that had a motion and a second. So if that's the language you would like, we can insert that in that section.
Okay, is that the language you would like to see, Councilwoman Burrs and Councilman Mitchell?
And this may cover it, Phil, but I also would like to hear not only the activities, but how we can make the legislation better. And I'm not sure how you want to word that.
Okay, activities
We
and recommendations.
don't know yet.
Yes, I can add that. If you got any other suggestions, I'll try to add that to that section.
Okay, Mr. Irvin, thank you for joining us. If you can bring Mr. Irvin down. So at this point, with that being said, can we go forward with bringing this legislation already and vote on it? Are we ready for that? We're okay with that? Okay. So when can we get this on our docket? Phil, where did it go?
Oh, whenever y'all tell me that you want it on your docket, I will have it up there. Do you want to have that next week or you want to have it the following week? I'm just trying to get a schedule.
Are everyone okay with next week?
Are we gonna vote now or in what Councilwoman Burrs and Councilman?
Yeah, the motion that she put on the floor in this body of work that was brought before us, it's time now we can put it on our agenda. And so I'm just making sure that I'm okay with telling Phil to move forward with putting this on our agenda for next week so we can vote on it. Councilman Burrs made a
I'm making the motion right now, Mr. Chair. Can we vote on it right now so that he can add it?
yes. I guess we need to do a roll call, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you so much. Lydia?
Okay, and I apologize. Is there a specific, I know I'm supposed to put the chairman and the vice chair at the end. Is there a specific person I need to start with, or can I just go in alphabetical order?
I think it'll be okay.
Alphabetical's fine.
Okay, Councilman Byrd?
Yes.
Okay. Councilman Byrd?
Yes.
Councilwoman Coonrod?
Yes.
Councilman Gilbert?
Yes.
Councilman Ledford?
Yes.
Councilman Mitchell?
Yes.
Councilman Oglesby? Is that a
I
yes?
hear you.
Yes,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
And Vice Chairman Smith?
Yes.
And Chairman Henderson?
Yes.
Okay, and that is 9 yeses.
All right. Vote passes with 9 yeses. And now at this time, do we need to take a vote to put it on our agenda for next week, or can we now move forward? Phil?
I am ready. If y'all will tell me when you want it to be brought forward, no problem.
Okay, would someone like to make a motion when we can bring it forward, or how would that work?
That would be good. Yes.
Who's gonna, and let me jump in here real quick, Mr. Chair. Who's sponsoring this legislation?
I think this is Councilman Gilbert and Councilwoman Coonrod.
Okay, so whoever the sponsors are need to determine if they want it on and when they want it on, and then the rest of the body can agree to it if it is within the 2-week time period.
I thought we had already passed it, what the legislation Russell and I put, so this would be an amendment. to
Yeah,
it, right?
I think that's correct. This is amendment to it. Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, that we put it on for the 2-week agenda on the 14th.
7/14.
And basically by consensus of the council, we would all be putting it on.
Correct.
Correct. But that's what I was asking for, a consensus of the council, and everybody was, okay.
So basically, if there's no objection to the 14th, it'll be on the 14th.
Wow. Thank you, Chair. All right. Thank you, guys. And so we'll see that on the, and seeing Councilman Gilbert.
No, I'm sorry, I was gonna say that, sir, but you ain't never called my name, so I keep on going.
Oh, so it's my fault. I'll take that.
There you go.
Appreciate it. All right. No problem at all. All right. Seeing no more questions, this definitely would be on the agenda on 7/14. And so I would now, Chairman Chip Henderson, is that an old hand?
That is a new hand, sir.
Okay, Chairman Chip Henderson.
If we're finished with the ordinance,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm assuming we are,
Yes.
I do have a nomination to put forward to this body for the Police Advisory Review Committee. About maybe 2 weeks ago now, I sent you a resume that I'm assuming everybody received it, for Dee Visser. And I would like to have her placed on the agenda as early as possible, preferably next week, to be voted on. If the entire council would agree to having her put on next week.
Fine by me.
Fine by you. I think we have a
consensus
from everyone. Okay. That is a good job. Thank you, Chairman Henderson.
Thank you.
Mr. Coonrod, Councilman Coonrod.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to see if you will be willing to hold another meeting to discuss what it looks like, to think outside of the box with our police department. A lot of the protesters, and specifically DSA, has talked about like with our first responders, and we can take a look at that instead of sending police officers out, what it looks like to see somebody that's a social worker that's dealing with mental health. People that's, able to handle those things instead of us sending out a police department. Somebody call about domestic violence, instead of sending a police officer, we send someone else out. If we could have that discussion on what it would look like, is it possible for our city to do it? Other cities have, started implementing those things, Albuquerque, Oregon, different areas. So I would like to see what it'll look like for our city to kind of do the same, or at least have a discussion on the table.
I would love that, Councilwoman. I will get with Chief Roddy and see when we can have that in committee and make that happen, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, seeing no more hands, we will now adjourn till 6 o'clock.
Nope.
No, one more committee.
We got one more committee.
Okay, I see it now. We will now move to the Legislative Committee.
Thank you, sir. All right, we'll call to order our Legislative Committee. Have approval of the minutes.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, motion and a second. Seeing no.
Second.
All right, seeing no issues with approvals, we'll just move forward. All right, I've got 3 pieces of legislation that have been brought to the Legislative Committee. And just to give everybody a background real quick, this committee is not to promote any of the legislation, it's simply to provide the opportunity for the members of the committee to discuss the legislation and then determine whether we're ready to move forward by putting it on our agenda or whether it needs some additional work first. The first item that I have listed on our agenda is the voting resolution. And Councilwoman Burrs asked earlier if we can just go ahead and put these up on the screen. So let me do that really quick. I'm sure everybody should have seen these by now, but I'll go ahead and share just in case. Give me one moment. That. All right, that should be it. Does everybody see the resolution now?
Is there any way you can enlarge it?
Yes. I can't really see it the same way you do, so you'll have to let me know if that is suitable.
It's better, yeah.
I can do it a little bit bigger too.
Yeah.
Does that work okay?
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay. So this is all, these resolutions have already been sent around, so everybody should have already seen them. The sponsor on this, Councilwoman Coonrod, am I correct in that you were the sponsor of this legislation?
Yes, and Erskine, I think he was on there, Gilbert and Bird.
Okay. Would one of you like to just give the council another just quick introduction to this, and then we can go through it and see if there's any questions, if there's any clarification that needs to be had? Anybody?
But sure, I will. I think the thing was that due to the pandemic and concerns of citizens, their safety, they still want to vote, but they don't want to put their, their safety at risk to vote. So making sure that everybody have an opportunity to vote by mail. If they, choose to mail in a ballot, they still will be able to exercise their right to vote. Just recently, the judge in Nashville, she ordered that our state allow this to happen. So I think it's very important.
Okay. I don't see any other hands. I do have a quick question. Councilwoman Coonrod or whoever, any of the other sponsors. Based on the recent ruling that basically extends absentee ballot requests or extends the reasoning that an absentee ballot would be allowed, does this resolution, do you still see that this resolution is necessary if legally people have to be allowed to receive a ballot based on the fear of in this case it is COVID, but any other issue? Do you see that this resolution as it's being presented is still necessary, or is there something beyond what the judge declared as legal or necessary at this time covers what it is you were trying to achieve?
I think that it is necessary because it shows that we as a council that we are supportive of it. Although that the judge did rule on it, it's still in for certain that our governor is going to say he's going to mandate this to happen, is he's going to agree with it, because there's still people who've tried to receive an absentee ballot since the ruling and not been given that way to vote. So I think it is necessary.
Okay. I follow that. Thank you, Councilwoman. Let's go to a couple of hands here. Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a question on the section where it reads that we urged to implement the Tennessee General Assembly during the coronavirus pandemic, but the Tennessee General Assembly is out of session sine die, and unless the governor calls back a special session, which I'm hearing is probably not going to happen, how do we urge the General Assembly to I don't understand the time frame.
Think that because this resolution was created prior to them ending their session, it just took a while to get on our agenda for whatever reason. Because I thought it should have been on the agenda, but we just now getting to it. And you're right, he's probably not going to call a special session, but we're not for certain how long this pandemic is going to go on, because we have the elections in August, we have them in November, and then we have them again for our city elections. And by that time in January, they will be back in office in January. So I think it's an opportunity to be ahead of it once they come back, that we're saying, hey, this is what we would like to see happen. And although they're not in session, they're still able to receive their emails. Some are still coming to the office and working on legislation as we speak.
And my second question, thank you, Councilwoman. My second question is, have we gotten a report on from the Election Commission that any of these suggestions are actually applicable, or they have the capability and manpower to implement?
I haven't, don't know if anyone else have. I did read in the newspaper that, they've had more than usual people, sending in their absentee ballots, which I think is great.
Yep.
So that's the extent that I know of that.
Okay, that's all the questions I have for this piece of legislation. Thank you so much.
Councilman, thank you. Councilman Gilbert?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I agree with Councilwoman Coonrod that we need to put this in place because we don't know, as she said, how long this virus is going to be around. And like she said, that they will be back in session, I think, in January. And that way they can see this and hopefully agree with this on other future elections. Because again, we don't know how long it's going to last. And right now, it's not getting any better. It's getting worse instead of better. So I agree with her on that.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Chairman Henderson.
Thank you, sir. And I'm asking a question really for my knowledge. The first one says provisions for free or prepaid postage. Does mail-in votes now come with prepaid or free postage?
They do not.
They do not. Who would bear the cost for the free or prepaid postage?
You asking? Well, me personally, I mean, I think we should. If it's a city election, then we should bear that fee. It's important for our citizens to vote.
Well, so if it's a state election, you're saying the state should bear the cost. If it's a city election, the city should bear the cost. If it's a federal election, the federal should bear the cost. Is that? Should that not?
Yeah.
Should that not be made clear in this legislation?
Hey, if you want to amend it, Chip, if you want to add that, yes, that's perfectly fine.
I'm just asking if it shouldn't be made clear.
I mean, I kind of read it. It's clear to me. I mean, if you think we need to say for each jurisdiction pay for it, then yes, we can add that in there.
And do we know, do we have any idea for the city how much that would be, Councilwoman?
No, I'm not an expert in that area, but I'm sure it will be substantial, but we already pay for, to getting the ballots and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that goes back to when I proposed that how we're doing our elections. So
Well, and to your point about we are paying for those elections, all of those costs are in the budget currently, or in the one we just passed. This would not be in the budget, correct?
Well, Chip, we find ways to get things done, and I think that this will be another added addition that we'll find a way to get it done.
I think I would like to know how much we're talking about in this provision. Thank you, Council Chair, Vice Chair.
Sure. Councilman Byrd.
Yes, I think it's definitely a cool piece of legislation and definitely something that's needed due to the issues that's going on in our society. And some of these things need to be definitely answered. So Chip, thank you for the questions. Can the staff or can our attorney, how do we find out that information, Chairman, to find out what will the cost of this be and to go down that road to tighten this legislation up? So often, things definitely are needed, but I would hate to just see something like this go down the wrong road just because of some misunderstandings or some things that maybe we not have factual information about. How do we get to that information? Would that be something that the staff would give us or something that our attorney would give us? Because we don't know the burden that it would cause the city to pay for that. And even though it's a law that has been put into place already, a lot of times information is not publicized and people do not know. And I think Councilwoman Coonrod said it earlier, our constituents need to know that we have their back and we're listening to them and we're doing everything possible to make sure that they, get the services and things that they need. And right now, I think a service to vote is something that's really needed. And some people are probably not going to be able to make it out their homes or probably even scared. And it can change an election drastically.
Agreed. Councilman, I'm not sure on that piece.
Mhm.
This not being my legislation, I certainly have not researched each of these items. I would say that the city attorney is definitely the best place to start.
Okay.
And it's possible the election commission would have an idea based on past absentee ballots that have been submitted, that a
Gotcha.
certain percentage, potentially over and above that, would be expected
Gotcha.
in order to give some kind of estimate. That would be my guess is the two best places to go. And we're only going to have an estimate. I mean, there's no way to know for sure how many people would request
Right.
a ballot and have to have it prepaid.
And can I ask this question as well? If that number is given and say just for saying reasons, say if that number is $100,000, at that point, we would then how would that money get spent, or what would that money come from when it comes to appropriating it? Do we know that, Phil or someone?
If you'd like me to respond, yes, sir. It's got to be in your budget to actually be paid. I would like to point out that this is not the effect of drafting an ordinance, as we were just talking about for the ordinance for the Police Advisory Review Committee. We were talking about a resolution where you're simply asking the folks that actually make that law to change the law.
Okay.
That is the purpose of this resolution, and it's a resolution calling for a change in the law under state law, which would provide where that money would come from. It's not necessarily something that would be generally assessed against the city or the state or the federal government unless the legislation calls for it. The reason that we're asking for that to be done is because at this point in time, the person in Davidson County, Chancellor Ellen Hobbs, has determined that our statute that is in effect that requires no voting by mail in Tennessee is unconstitutional. So we're just simply asking the legislature to try to adopt something that would be constitutional in connection with this resolution. So that provision is going to be something that will be resolved later on. It's not something that will be coming on right now, but you're asking the General Assembly, which has adopted a law that a judge has found to be unconstitutional, to change the law. That is up to that court, as I read in the Times Free Press today here as well. Apparently the judge is issuing continuing orders. The state is also in the process of filing an appeal. So we do not know if that judge's order is going to be retained or not retained in the long run. This is merely encouraging the legislature to act to try to adopt something that is constitutional.
So this right here basically would be our stance to say that we support it, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Is that good?
Yes, sir.
Councilman Gilbert.
I think Phil said it all.
Okay.
This is just a suggestion to them to ask them to do this. I think that Councilwoman Coonrod is correct when it comes to all our citizens should have an opportunity to vote. This is a very important election coming up, and also next year is an important election. And they should have an opportunity to feel comfortable voting, because if they didn't have this in place, you will find a lot of people not going to the polls because of fear of the COVID-19. And in Tennessee, it's getting worse and not better. So I agree with Councilwoman Coonrod that this needs to be put in place. We need to vote on it. If someone has a disagreement about the postage, yeah, it's gonna cost a lot of money. I know in my precinct, you're talking about $3,000 or $4,000 just one home for stamps. So it will cost quite a bit, but that's not the whole thing about this ordinance. I mean, resolution. It's just an intent that we want to see this happen for people to vote by mail.
Okay. Thank you, Councilman. Anybody else? Hey, Phil, let me ask you another clarifying point to what you had stated. So based on this resolution asking the state legislators to make changes to our election laws, that's one thing. The other one is what is potentially going to be allowed in reference specifically to absentee ballots, which is already in place. It just doesn't allow for somebody to get an absentee ballot specifically for COVID.
Yes.
To me, this doesn't actually address that, and this, the soonest that it would be acted on would be next year. So if we want to make a statement that we would like the state to allow absentee ballots to be issued for the reason of COVID or the pandemic, however that needs to be stated, shouldn't we be clear about that, and possibly even an additional resolution to this one that is specific to that doesn't impact the legislators that aren't going to be meeting until next year?
Yes, sir. The story, at least in today's paper, I've been in court this morning, so I don't claim to be up on it completely, but apparently the state elections coordinator sent instructions last week to 20 counties to actually revise some of their absentee forms. The judge or chancellor who is handling this matter in Nashville told them that they didn't go far enough in how they were doing that, and they were trying to at least make sure something was done as quickly as possible. I think there's a dispute going on that right now in the court system in Nashville as to how far that goes. I'm not sure which 20 counties were supposed to have edited. I guess we do need to check with our Hamilton County folks to see if they've received instructions from the state elections coordinator to do that or not. And that's one thing I would like to do here in the report back to you.
All right, that'd be great, sir. If you wouldn't mind checking on that, that'd be good, because I think it's important that we stress that we as a body, or those who would support it, are in favor of allowing an absentee ballot for the purpose of the pandemic. And that is something that would actually affect the August election. Whereas, this type of legislation is a greater reaching, and as Councilman Ledford pointed out, probably wouldn't be acted on until next year at the very soonest if our legislators took it up. So I want to make sure that we are taking action, showing our support of something that would be impactful immediately in the very next election as well. So Phil, if you wouldn't mind checking, that'd be great. I mean, if we've already made the changes here locally in Hamilton County, great. Then it may not be necessary, but if not, it may be something that we need to also do. Councilwoman, thank you, Phil. Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you. So quickly did some research for you for those that want to know the cost. So in 2013, of course, we had 15,695 people that voted. And so if our stamp doesn't go up anymore, it's 55 cents. And so that'll be around $8,000-ish. If it becomes a runoff, then of course it'll be more money. But again, I think it'll be worth it to make sure that our citizens will be able to have the opportunity to vote. But as Phil has stated, this legislation is just to say that our council supports it. That's it. If anything, if they've already sent down to our election commission to make changes, great. At least our citizens will know and see that our council supports universal voting during this pandemic.
Okay. Thank you, Councilwoman. Chairman Henderson.
Thank you, sir. Let me second what you said just a moment ago, Vice Chair, that, and I think you said it very well about allowing the mail-in votes to be used for COVID. I think what I have is a problem with some of the language in this resolution that I think will make part of this very difficult to do, and still be used as a valid mail-in vote. But I think I could support just the regular mail-in ballot being used for the purpose of COVID as well. So I think your idea, I think what you were hitting on is a very valid, and I would second that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Councilman Ledford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just sitting here thinking a little bit, and I do have some questions under item 1 when it lists A through I. I have several questions, kind of logistic questions that kind of give me some pause as the way this is written. I do think I like the suggestion to ensure everybody has a chance to vote. I don't think anybody wants to ever deny that. And I think that due to COVID, we need to do everything in our power. But I think that there's conversations inside items A to I that are still need to be answered. For me personally, So I would be really, really interested in seeing a more generic version supporting everyone's right to an absentee ballot due to COVID, and have that right. And, you know, even Councilwoman Coonrod's mentioning postage. That you know, I can even go on that line item and talk about that. But there's some other items here I think that are internally, I have some cool questions about that would keep me from supporting this as written currently. But I do think we're moving in the right direction, and everyone deserves a chance to vote. And COVID has certainly changed the opportunities, and people are scared, and I recognize that. But I still think we also need to make sure that we don't compromise what the election commission can actually handle. And I think that's a question that needs to be answered. So that's just my last thoughts on that, but I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, I see no other hands, and we've got 2 other pieces of legislation and only 10 minutes before our council meeting. I don't want to put these pieces of legislation off because, again, they are not mine. I am trying to do my best for the sponsors, but I don't see that we're going to be able to get to every piece of legislation, have a good discussion about it, and then be able to decide how to move on and still take at least a 1-minute break before our meeting. Councilwoman Coonrod, I see your hand again, and we still are on this piece of legislation. I haven't taken the next step about where we're going to go with it, but please go ahead.
I'm fine with the resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis. If we can move that to next week, I know we're limited on time, but I would like for this piece of legislation to move forward, and whoever is against it, they just vote however they feel, and whoever is for it, then we move forward with it.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Councilwoman Burrs, did you have something to add, please?
Yeah, as far as my resolution and Councilman Mitchell's, we can move forward without discussion simply because the Supreme Court already ruled on this. I do think that I want the council to pass the resolution just to show we're supportive, but it's moot legally. So I don't think we need a discussion today. We can just move forward next week.
Okay, so let me take these few steps and we can wrap this up. This piece of legislation before us, do we have a consensus to put this on the agenda for 2 weeks out? Or maybe I should ask, is there anybody that opposes having this added to the agenda in 2 weeks out? Knowing that there are some items in here that may be an issue for certain council members, we will have another opportunity to discuss any piece of legislation on our agenda. So we can continue to do that, but get this on the 2-week agenda for the 14th. All right, I'm seeing no hands. Phil, this one needs to go on the 14th, please.
All right, sir.
Then the equality resolution stated by Councilwoman Burrs. I'm asking the same question right now. She is absolutely correct. This is all a moot point as far as legally. However, it does show our support of that as well. Does anybody have a problem with it going on the agenda for the 14th? All right, Phil, no objection to that one. Rolling to the last one on the racism as a public health crisis. Councilwoman Coonrod and co-sponsor, I'm sorry, who was the co-sponsor, ma'am?
It was all the Black council people.
Erskine too, okay. This has been requested to go on next week's agenda, so 7 days out. Is there any objection to placing this 7 days out? We, of course, can discuss it in agenda meeting next week. All right, seeing none, Phil, please put it on next week's agenda.
Sure.
All right, that, ladies and gentlemen, wraps up the legislative committee meeting. Is there any further business for this committee? I'm seeing no hands. Since there is not, we will adjourn until 6 o'clock. Everybody take an 8-minute break and we will see you back in a few minutes. Thank you.